I returned home from a business trip to find my life stuffed into garbage bags on the curb. My mother, who should have been my biggest fan, stood on the porch with her arms crossed. Her face showed pure disappointment. She looked at me, then at the bags of my clothes and memories spilling onto the damp lawn. Then she said the words that changed everything. "You don't live here anymore, Amanda. You're a failure." That moment shattered my world, my life, my family, my future. But getting kicked out wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was the secret she hid. I'd discover it in a sliced-open cardboard box, a secret worth over $100,000. Growing up in Raleigh, my family seemed perfect. We lived in a charming 2-story house. The lawns were always neat and smiles were bright. My dad was a respected surgeon until he passed away when I was 16. My mother, Alina, played the grieving widow role flawlessly. To the world, she was a saint, known for her charity work, style, and confidence. But to me, she was a storm of criticism, always reminding me I wasn't good enough. I'm Amanda Price, 30 years old and still trying to find my way. I had a decent marketing job, but it wasn't the high-powered career my mother wanted. I wasn't married, had no kids, and lived at home to save money. That was the official story. The truth? Every time I tried to spread my wings, my mom found a way to ground me. After college, I got a job offer out of state, and suddenly she had a mysterious health issue that kept me close. I started a serious relationship, and she pointed out a million tiny flaws in him until I noticed them too. Her control was sneaky. She often said, "I want what's best for you, darling." But then she crushed my confidence, and the biggest carrot she dangled was the future fund. My grandfather, a sharp and loving man, had left me a pretty big trust fund. His will was crystal clear. I get the full amount on my 30th birthday. But after my dad died, my mom, the sole trustee, convinced me it was smarter to let it mature with her guidance. "You're not ready for that kind of responsibility, Amanda," she'd say with a sad little smile. "Let me handle it until you're more settled." And like an idiot, I agreed. I trusted her. A part of me was terrified of that much money, a fear she'd carefully planted over years of calling me impulsive and bad with cash. I saw the fund as my escape pod, the money that would finally let me build my own life away from her judgment. My 30th birthday came and went. Whenever I brought it up, she had an excuse. The market was down. There were tax things to think about. It was always, "A little longer, Amanda, be patient." The week she kicked me out, I was on a high. I'd landed a huge new client for my firm and I was leading the project. I flew to Chicago for meetings, feeling, for the first time, like I was finally the success she always claimed she wanted me to be. I called her from my hotel, buzzing with excitement, and her response was lukewarm. "Well, don't get ahead of yourself," she warned. "One small success doesn't make a career." I brushed it off. That was her way, always ready with a pin to pop any balloon of happiness I had. I had no idea that while I was celebrating, she was at home, getting ready to erase my entire future. I had no clue her words weren't a warning, they were a smokescreen. The taxi pulled up to the curb and my stomach dropped. It was a drizzly Thursday, and seeing those black garbage bags on the lawn felt like something out of a movie, not my life. For a split second, I thought a pipe had burst or something. But then I saw my favorite lamp sticking out of one bag, its shade bent like a broken neck. My books were spilling out of a soggy cardboard box. It was all my stuff. And there she was, my mother on the porch, looking at me not with sympathy but with this terrifying calm. Those words, "You're a failure," hung in the air. She told me she had sold the house. She was downsizing to a condo and there was no room for me. She handed me a piece of paper, a typed eviction notice. It looked so official, citing my failure to contribute financially and my lack of ambition. My hands shook as I read this work of fiction she had created to justify it. "Where am I supposed to go?" I whispered, my voice all scratchy from shock. "A grown woman should be able to figure that out," she said, her voice completely flat. "This is for your good, Amanda. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Then she turned around, walked inside, and shut the door. The click of that lock was the sound of my life ending. I spent that first night in a cheap motel with the few bags I'd managed to save from the rain. I felt this deep, gut-twisting shame. Was she right? Was I a failure, 30 years old, homeless, and kicked out by my mother? Her voice was in a loop in my head, listing every single one of my flaws. The betrayal felt like a sickness. It was 2 days later, as I was sorting through a damp box of papers, that I found it. It was a shoebox, the kind you keep old photos in, but the lid was weird. It had been slit open and then taped shut, leaving a messy appearance. My hands, still shaky, fumbled with the tape. Inside, under a bunch of old birthday cards, was a stack of envelopes. They weren't friends or family. They were bank statements. They were from a bank I'd never heard of, addressed to the Amanda Price Trust. Every single one of them had been opened. I laid out statement after statement, going back years, on the dingy motel carpet. The first one, from almost 10 years ago, caught my breath with a balance of over $200,000. My grandfather's gift, my future. Then I saw the recent statements. Withdrawal, wire transfer. Money was bleeding out of the account in a steady, horrifying stream. Tens of thousands of dollars gone. I noticed dates matching her fancy trip to Italy, the new car she treated herself to, and the charity donations that earned her a plaque at the theater. This wasn't new. She'd been slowly draining my future for years. The last statement showed the current balance, $734. The air vanished from my lungs. The shame I'd been drowning in was suddenly gone, replaced by this cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't about me being a failure. This wasn't about teaching me a lesson. She kicked me out because the money was gone. She had to get rid of me before I found out, and calling me a failure was the perfect cover story. It was a preemptive strike. If everyone thought I was a mess, who would believe me when I said my saintly mother stole from me? All that time, she was chipping away at my confidence. It was to make the robbery easier. The woman who gave me life had stolen the one my grandfather tried to give me, and right there, on that motel floor, something inside me broke, but something else formed in its place. The grief turned into something harder, colder. It turned into a purpose. I spent a week in a total fog. A friend from work let me stay in her spare room, a kind soul who gave me tea and didn't ask too many questions. I'd go to the office and try to stare at spreadsheets, but all I could see were bank statements and my mother's face on that porch. At night, I'd lie awake, totally paralyzed. I was completely alone. Everyone we knew thought my mother was a saint. Who would ever believe me over her? And then a name popped into my head, Chloe. Chloe was my cousin, my mother's niece. She was the family's black sheep, the one we avoided discussing. Years ago, when we were in our early 20s, Chloe wanted to start a catering business. She asked my mom for a small loan from their grandmother's fund. My mom said no, called the idea foolish, and claimed it would fail. Chloe tried anyway and scraped the money together herself. The business struggled. I remember my mom's smug, "I told you so" attitude. Some people aren't cut out for success, she'd say. Now I wondered what had happened. Finding her was easy. A quick Google search led me to a small law firm in Charlotte. Chloe wasn't a lawyer, she was a paralegal. It looked like after her business failed, she put herself through school and built a whole new life, far away from our family's judgment. I stared at the call button on my phone for a solid 10 minutes. Calling her felt like admitting my whole family was a lie. Finally, I hit dial. Her voice was cautious. "Amanda, is that you?" I let it all out, the whole story, a messy, tear-filled rush of words. The eviction, the bags, the box, the statements. I was expecting her to be skeptical, maybe even hit me with a well-deserved, "I told you so." Instead, there was this long, heavy silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and tight with a fury that startled me. "That monster," she breathed. "I knew she was a snake, but I never imagined this." And then she told me her story. My mother hadn't refused her the loan. She'd actively sabotaged her. She had called the bank where Chloe had applied for a loan and planted doubts about her. "She told me I was like my father, a dreamer with no common sense," Chloe said. "She has this thing where she has to be the only successful one, the queen bee everyone needs. Anyone who tries to build something on their own is a threat to her." Suddenly, I wasn't alone. Chloe got it. She was the only other person on the planet who understood what my mother was really like. The next day, she drove 3 hours from Charlotte. She sat on the floor of my borrowed room, looked at the fake eviction notice, and laughed this bitter, humorless laugh. "This is a joke, Amanda," she said, tapping the paper. "This isn't a real legal document. It's something she typed up on her computer to scare you. She has no right to throw you out like that." We spent the whole weekend hunched over those bank statements. Chloe went into full-on paralegal mode. She was highlighting withdrawals, matching them to my mother's lavish spending. Her focused anger was the antidote to my grief. Where I saw a tragedy, she saw a clear-cut case of fraud. "She was a trustee, Amanda," Chloe said, her voice sharp. "She had a fiduciary duty. That's a legal duty to act in your best interest. She didn't steal from you, she broke the law, over and over again for years. She pulled out her laptop and started looking up trust lawyers. We're not getting your money back, she said, looking right at me, her eyes blazing. We're going to burn her little kingdom to the ground. That was the moment everything changed. The victim who cried on the motel floor was gone. With Chloe there, I wasn't some failure my mother threw away. I was a beneficiary whose rights had been violated. And for the first time since my world imploded, I felt a tiny flicker of power. My pain was hardening into resolve. My mother had underestimated me. She had underestimated Chloe. She had called us both failures, and we were about to show her exactly how wrong she was. Hiring a lawyer was the first step in fighting back. Chloe found us Mr. Davies, a quiet lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of thing. In our first meeting, I spread the bank statements across his big, polished desk. I was nervous, my voice shaky as I told him the whole story. He listened, his face impossible to read, looking at every single piece of paper. When I was done, he leaned back. Ms. Price, he said, his voice calm but solid, what your mother has done isn't wrong. It's a textbook case of breach of fiduciary duty. As trustee, she was legally required to protect the trust's assets for you. Instead, she used them as her piggy bank. The legal process started, and it was like peeling an onion, where every layer was more rotten than the last. Mr. Davies filed a petition to have my mother removed as trustee and force her to account for every penny. Of course, she fought back. Her lawyer sent back a response painting me as a troubled, angry daughter making things up. They claimed my mother only used the money for my care and upkeep. A lie we could easily prove was false since I had been paying her rent for the past 5 years. The worst part was the depositions. We had to sit across a table from each other with our lawyers. It was the first time I'd seen her since she shut the door in my face. She looked perfect, of course, in a classy navy suit, acting like a martyr. And she lied. With a straight face, she lied. The trip to Italy, that was an educational tour she took on my behalf to research art history, a passion she claimed I had. The new car, that was to drive me around safely. The big cash withdrawals, she said that was my allowance, cash I had wasted. Amanda was always so careless with money, she said to the court reporter, shaking her head sadly. I was trying to teach her responsibility. I had to protect her from herself. It was the most insane gaslighting I'd ever experienced. She was trying to rewrite history to make her crimes seem like an act of love. I had to clench my fists under the table to keep from shaking. But then I'd look at Chloe, sitting right behind our lawyer, her eyes steady and furious. Her strength kept me going. I answered every question calmly. I had my bank records, my pay stubs, and my rent checks to her. I was not the person she was describing. I was a woman who had been robbed by the one person she should have been able to trust. The real nail in her coffin came when we subpoenaed her credit card records. Mr. Davies and Chloe spent a week creating a timeline. This simple spreadsheet exposed her. On one side were withdrawals from my trust. On the other, my mother's spending. A $15,000 withdrawal on May 10th, a down payment for her luxury SUV on May 11th, a $25,000 withdrawal on July 1st. A first-class ticket to Paris was bought on July 2nd. It went on and on. The pattern was clear. She didn't even try to hide it. Her arrogance led her to believe she wouldn't get caught. The final blow was a surprise witness Chloe tracked down. It was an old friend of my mom's from her charity group. She testified that my mother used to brag about her unlimited resources and clever investments. The woman even remembered one specific, chilling conversation. Eleanor once told me that inheritances were wasted on the young, she told the court. She said it was a parent's duty to manage those assets and that sometimes maturity never comes. In the end, it wasn't a dramatic courtroom shoutdown. It was quieter and so much worse for her. It was the moment Mr. Davies put that spreadsheet up for the judge to see. My mother, at her table, went completely pale. Her lawyer just shuffled his papers, refusing to look at the judge. There was nothing to say. The numbers didn't lie. Her whole story, her entire identity as the perfect, caring mother, dissolved under the weight of the facts. The judge's ruling was fast and brutal. My mother was fired as trustee. She was ordered to pay back every cent she stole, plus interest, plus our legal fees. It was enough to force her to sell her new condo and everything else she owned. Her reputation, the only thing she truly cared about, was destroyed. As we walked out of the courthouse, I saw her standing there, her face a mask of shock and rage. She had called me a failure, but her greed and lies were what brought her down. She lost everything, not because of me, but because of who she is. And I had one. Not my money, but my truth. In the months after the verdict, my mother's perfect life completely unraveled. The judgment forced her to sell her condo, and the whispers in her fancy social circles turned into a full-blown scandal. The friends who used to admire her now saw her for what she was, a thief who stole from her kid. Some family members who had blindly believed her tried to call me with weak apologies, but it was too little, too late. I'd seen who they were. I let their calls go to voicemail. Getting the money back was strange. Seeing that number in my new bank account, an account she knew nothing about, felt less about the money and more about what it stood for. It was justice. It was proof. But it didn't magically heal everything. The pain of losing your mother, not because she's gone, but because of who she turned out to be, is a special kind of grief that sticks with you. But the money gave me something I never had. Freedom. Real freedom. I quit my job, the one I had to impress her. I packed my bags, for real this time, and left Raleigh. I spent 6 months traveling, seeing places I'd only dreamed about. For the first time, no one whispered in my ear that I was doing it wrong. When I returned, I didn't go back to marketing. I used some money to study forensic accounting. Untangling my mother's lies ignited a passion in me. My trauma turned into my new career. Now, I work for a firm that investigates financial fraud, especially within families. I help others find the truth, like Chloe and Mr. Davies helped me. I'm not the failure she desired. I'm a survivor who built a future from the ashes of the life she tried to destroy. My mother is no longer in my life. I don't know where she is, and I don't care to find out. She was my creator, but also my destroyer. In the end, I had to destroy the version of me she made to save myself. She took my past, but in doing so, she gave me a future she could never control, one I built on my terms. Thank you for hearing my story. It was a tough journey, but sharing it helps me heal. Many people face financial or emotional abuse alone, feeling isolated. If my story feels familiar, please share yours in the comments. Let's create a supportive community here. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more. Your support means everything.